tips for fixing problems in code. Number 4, explain it to someone else. You know, often we think of programming as a fairly solitary kind of activity, but this is actually the reason that we have made one of the reasons we've made that first assignment a team assignment, is so you have someone else to talk to about the problems that you're coming up against in your code. Because often, when you explain a problem that you're getting in your code to someone else, it actually lets you see what the problem is and understand it as well. I think what happens often is we get into this tunnel vision mode when we're programming, where you just get focused and focused and focused in on like one little bit of it, and you sort of can't see the forest for the trees. I'm really mixing my metaphors here. But if you sit down with your teammate and say, look, I really need some help, just need to talk through this problem with you, and take them through your code from start to finish, explain what each part should be doing, and if they ask you good questions about your assumptions, like, okay, what value should a variable have, or things like that, often that will let you kind of think about it in a new way. You'll be able to explain why the behavior you see is not what you're actually expecting. So I don't have any like code for you to go and fix this time. What I actually want you to do is go into Slack, and if you run into a problem with your code this week, post it into the Slack discussion and see if someone else can help you with your code. Put it in there and put a little explanation, and if you look at someone else's code, ask them questions about their code. Try and get that dialogue about understanding what the code does. If you go into Slack, just post it into the lecture chat, and if you go to any of these, you can actually just start a thread by clicking on that little conversation icon. So if you see someone else's code that you want to comment on, just start a thread, and then they'll be able to you'll be able to have a little conversation about that. I'm going to skip ahead, and I won't pause the video this time, to the 5th tip, which is printing to the console. So this is a really super useful way of understanding the dynamics of your program. One of the things that's difficult about code is when we write it, we see a text file that's not moving, but then when we run it, it becomes this creative coding sketch where things are moving around on the screen. You go from something that's static to something that's dynamic. And when you only look at the static part of that equation, you have to imagine in your own mind what's happening dynamically. And that's very difficult for us as humans to do, because we don't think in quite the same way as a computer, right? So one of the things you can do is put these console.log statements into your code to see what's happening dynamically. So here, inside this code, this little screenshot of code here, I've got a console.log statement that's inside a for loop. And as that for loop's going around, I can see the values in the console for this variable I and the variable P. I is 105, 106, 107, 108, and P is getting loaded with some kind of an object. I can see from that that it's doing what I expect or not expect. I might see that I suddenly has a value that's not what I'm expecting. Another thing you can use console.log for is to print out the different branches of your program flow. Like if you have an if statement with if something is true, then do one thing, else if it's not true, do something else. It's sometimes hard to imagine which of those two things it's going to do. It might do the other thing when you're expecting it to do the first thing. So what you can do is put a console.log statement in each branch of that if statement. Put one in the true part that says console.log, it's doing the true part, and then put one in the false part that says console.log, it's doing the false part. And then when you run the sketch, if you see something like it's doing the false part, 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 and you never see it printing it's doing the true part, you know that it's going only into one part of your code, and maybe that's not what you expected. It helps you track down where an error is coming from. So here's an activity for you. Go to the live version and add a console log statement into the for loop in the preload function. There's a for loop in the preload function, and I want you to add a console.log statement to log the value of the variable I through this for statement. and see if I is causing any problems. That's a pretty big hint about what's going on, but I just want you to get the hang of using the console.log. Pause me now and fix the code, and unpause me when you're done. Did you unpause me? I hope so. Let's click into the browser and I'll run through that with you. Go into the web editor. This is the example. You can see the for loop in the preload function. When I run it, I'll get an error. Event is trusted true constructor object. Now this is an error that you might see from time to time if you're loading images, and it's not very helpful, this particular one, but it is from a problem in the loading of the images. So if we add in that console.log statement on line 6, oh, and I need to remember to keep increasing my font size so you can see it. Console.log, it's all lowercase, and then you can just put I usually make a little string to say the message I want it to say. So I'm going to say I plus I. So I'm just writing out the string I with the value of whatever's in that variable I. If you wanted to, you can just put console.log I, but this is just a slightly nicer way to write it. Then when we run it on the screen, in the bottom, we're going to see all those values of I printed out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, if you've been paying attention in the last couple of lectures and tutorials, you will have heard me going on and on about this thing of zero-based indexing of arrays. That's the problem here. When we have an array that has 5 elements in it, we don't start at 1, we actually start at 0. And so we would only go up to be less than or equal to 4, or less than or 5 is a more normal way to write it. From 0 to 5 is the 0th, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and not 5th, just to the 4th index of the array. And that will run. There's another error actually, and I'll leave that as a homework problem, but since we solved this problem where the person, which was me, thought that the array should start from 1, that's a clue to what some of the other problems in this code are. So there's actually a number of problems in this code, but I'll let you figure that out. All right, I'll be back with the last couple of tips after this.